Guangzhou Liwan Plaza, built in 1996 on the bustling stretch of Ziyajie Road, integrates entertainment, dining, shopping, and lifestyle, making it the most luxurious plaza in Liwan district. However, since its opening, this bustling commercial street has been plagued by a spate of paranormal activity, often accompanied by accidental deaths. At first, local authorities dismissed the incidents as accidents or inadequate safety measures. However, horrifyingly, as time passed, the number of accidental deaths increased, and the methods of death became increasingly bizarre. In 2004 alone, more than a dozen people died in Liwan Plaza. Some shop owners were electrocuted while closing their businesses, while others, despite having no history of heart disease, suffered a sudden heart attack. On Valentine's Day 2004, two teenage girls committed suicide together, leaving behind a strange letter in blood. On April 8, a 5-year-old girl fell from the 3rd floor and died instantly. On June 17, a cleaning worker discovered the body of a baby on the 2nd floor staircase. No further information has been found about the body. In October, 4 people died after falling from upper floors. An elderly man in his 60s from the 5th floor, a middle-aged man in his 50s from the 5th floor, a young woman in her 20s from the 15th floor, and an elderly woman from the South Tower. On December 30, a security guard died of poisoning from burning coal for heating. In fact, the strangeness of Liwan Square wasn't limited to 2004. In 2005, several murders also occurred, including a shopkeeper electrocuted, a security guard tripped and fell to his death, group suicides, and self-immolations. These incidents are still traceable. After all, more than a decade has passed, and some deaths were so sudden that records may no longer be available. From 2004 to 2017, Central News reported 13 cases, 7 of which were suicides. Regarding the accidental deaths in 2004 and 2015, some authorities have denied their existence, so their authenticity remains to be determined. However, almost everyone knows that people die in Liwan Square every year. Because of the frequent deaths in the square, most of which are classified as suicides, Liwan Square has become a suicide sanctuary. Some even say that at night, if you accidentally glance at the Liwan shopping mall sign, you'll see Liwan Corpse Field. Such bizarre events, coupled with the inexplicable deaths, fueled widespread rumors and supernatural tales throughout the city. Many residents were terrified and avoided Liwan Plaza, resulting in a significant loss of customers. Just a few years after opening, the plaza collapsed due to a series of fatalities and accidents, leading to a decline in profits and many businesses losing everything. Both officials and vendors were distraught. At this point, the local government intervened, stating that both accidental deaths and suicides were normal occurrences and that some people were misleading and exaggerating the facts. To allay the panic, the billboards in Liwan Plaza were also changed. Among the many suicide attempts, one man managed to escape death, and his explanation for his death left many people shuddering. The man later told reporters that he had no intention of committing suicide, and that something pushed him and controlled his mind when he fell from the square. The man was not from Guangzhou, he was from Jiangsu, and had come to Guangzhou to negotiate a business deal. On the day of the incident, he was enjoying himself in Liwan Square. Over the years, his business had flourished, and his family was happy. It was unlikely that he had committed suicide due to depression. At first, everything was normal in the mall, but when he reached the 5th floor, he heard what sounded like someone calling his name. As he turned to look, he suddenly felt a force pushing him from behind. Then he was pushed down by that immense force. Lee also mentioned that as he fell, he saw a strange face around a corner, smiling at him. Lee's words sent a chill down everyone's spine. Later, a young boy told his parents that, on his way home with them, he looked back from the car and saw many children his own age lined up in the windows of the Liwan Plaza building, repeatedly waving at him, though he couldn't see their faces. While some explained that the boy might have been dazzled, or that the other children were polite and friendly, the sight of so many children lining up to greet him was inherently odd. But these two oddities weren't the only ones. On the 1st floor, there was a 7-Eleven convenience store. The owner instructed employees on their night shift that if someone came in through the back door, no matter what they were carrying, they should not accept money or stop them. They should also avoid looking at their faces and absolutely avoid letting them notice them. After taking their items, they would return to the back door, which led to the mall, which closed for the night. This 7-Eleven was the only access point to the back door after closing time. As for the reason, the owner is often vague. It's said that the supermarket has received ghost money in the past, but they've never been able to identify the source. Whether true or false, these mysteries all point to one thing: Liwan Plaza must be hiding a secret. At the time, a member of the Cheyenne community, surnamed Han, who claimed to be a resident of Liwan District, made remarks that cast a new shadow of fear over Liwan Square. To save their lives, Han's family eventually moved away. The story begins in 1993. At the time, Guangzhou, one of China's most economically developed cities, was ahead of other cities in the construction of a wide variety of high-rise buildings during the wave of reform. A slum in Ziguan was spotted by Mr. Z, a boss of Guangjian. Although this area was a terrifying mass grave before it was open to the public, it wasn't until the 1970s that it gradually became a residential area. But for the land and gold developers, no matter where it was, as long as there was money to be made, it was a good place. Originally, building new urban areas was beneficial to both developers and residents. Unfortunately, Mr. Z was no good. Not only did he embezzle all the residents' relocation compensation, he also demanded they leave their homes within a certain time frame. Naturally, the locals refused, and physical confrontations ensued. Seeing this, Mr. Z quickly organized a group of thugs from the community. With tacit approval from higher-ups, they brutally assaulted the residents, who dared to demand their homes, risking their lives. Many residents were severely injured. He even went door to door in the middle of the night, banging on doors and forcing people to sign. Those who refused were dragged into vans and beaten. The residents, cornered, finally erupted in silence. They grabbed weapons and engaged in a fight with the local construction team and the hired thugs who were stationed there to maintain order. The fight ended only when the police intervened. After hearing about this, Mr. Z halted the demolitions and threats, and remained silent for several days. Some of his staff even left. At first, the residents thought they had given up, but what followed was a bloodbath. One night, someone suddenly shouted fire. Immediately, a large crowd of people cried for help, and the streets were filled with the screams of the burned, and the cries of those calling for help. After more than 10 hours of rescue efforts, the fire was finally put out, but over 30 residents were burned to death, and 2 others died from their injuries. After the incident, the local government immediately dispatched personnel to investigate. An investigation revealed that the boss had intended to burn down all the houses to evict the residents. Once the residents were homeless, there would be no point in resisting the demolition. He had originally thought that after the houses were set on fire, the emergency services would arrive to put out the fire and rescue the people. Once the fire was extinguished, the houses would surely be completely destroyed. As long as no one died, everything would be fine. Even if a few people died, the authorities would just write a report and the matter would be over. But he hadn't expected the fire to be so fierce that even the firefighters were puzzled. The fire was so strange that they could not extinguish it despite repeated attempts to put it out with water. The CEO was imprisoned and sentenced to death for intentional homicide. He died of a heart attack the day before his sentencing, though his family claimed he had no history of heart disease. Municipal officials who colluded with him were also arrested, and the residents, at the cost of dozens of lives, finally achieved temporary peace. But from then on, strange noises would emanate from the burned and sealed-off houses at night. People could hear cries for help, cries, curses, and the screams of those injured during the fire. Soon, some residents moved out, and then more and more residents followed. But Han didn't move at that time, but rather because of a strange incident later. After the original developer's misfortune, his subordinates, realizing the situation was dire, abandoned the project, leaving only the unfinished buildings and attempting to force the owners to reclaim them. This caused a huge mess. Remember, the buyers at the time were all overseas Chinese from Hong Kong, Macau, and other places, and Hong Kong and Macau hadn't yet returned to China. Unable to find a solution, the relevant authorities in Guangzhou took the issue seriously. They assigned a second Guangjian boss to repair the building. Due to poor construction safety conditions at the time, a worker died due to improper workmanship shortly after the development began. The developer, also a ruthless person, refused to compensate the deceased, leading to protests from many of the victims' families. One day, a family member seeking redress discovered the developer and his mistress dead in their office. Their deaths were horrific, with extensive wounds and torsos torn apart. However, the most bizarre thing was that the medical examiner was unable to determine the cause of death. They could only determine that the injuries were caused by a large beast that had forcibly dismembered the body, but the bite marks were so strange that it was impossible to identify the animal. The development site was once again closed due to a death. But then a third developer arrived. During this period, a neighbor who had not yet relocated, feeling hopeless without a home, committed suicide by jumping from the highest point of the construction site, continuing the tragedy. This developer also suffered a cerebral hemorrhage while inspecting the construction site and fell from the building, his temple impaled on rebar. However, these events didn't deter Han from moving out, until a horrifying incident occurred. Local rumors of haunted territory intensified, causing increasing headaches for the authorities. Seeing that even the in-the-know bosses in mainland China were avoiding the area, no one was willing to take on this thorny project. Consequently, the authorities resorted to a policy of attracting foreign investment, which ultimately led to the arrival of the third developer, Mr. Gao, from Hong Kong. Perhaps due to their inherited traditional culture, people in Hong Kong and Taiwan are more inclined to believe in metaphysics than mainland Chinese, leading many business owners to employ their own personal mentors. Mr. Gao had made his fortune in Hong Kong through illegal land-related transactions, and his success was largely due to the exceptional skills of his trusted advisor. Mr. Gao had brought the mentor to Guangzhou, hoping to assess the land's worth. Unbeknownst to Mr. Gao, the mentor had recently taken on a private business without his knowledge. Normally, someone of master's stature, once partnered with a boss, would be employed by only one person. Of course, this one-on-one relationship is no longer the norm these days. Precisely because of master's absent-mindedness, he made a rather unwise mistake during his career. He failed to delve into the local community to investigate the site's origins. This, in turn, led to the tragic family annihilation incident that befell Boss Gao. After Boss Gao and Master inspected the site, and with Master's positive response, Boss Gao applied for funding from his superiors and devoted himself to rebuilding Liwan Square. However, as soon as work began, trouble began. First, workers reported that something was buried underground, preventing the pile driver from driving. Boss Gao, believing it was a blackmail pretext from the foreman, angrily scolded him, saying, "Hard, even if there's granite underneath, you still have to drive the piles in." With Boss Gao's firm order, the construction team had no choice but to put aside their suspicions and continue digging. However, they unearthed 8 coffins. Not only were the workers stunned, but because the site wasn't properly sealed off, the news spread like wildfire, reaching the local television station. This was a disaster. The television coverage, coupled with the fate of the 2 previous developers, fueled the rumors of a haunting. When the news reached Boss Gao, he panicked and immediately rushed to Guangzhou with a master. Upon arriving at the construction site, Gao first gave the television station several generous red envelopes to calm their nerves, begging them to stop spreading rumors. Then he immediately sent the master to investigate. When the master arrived at the scene and saw the 8 coffins, he was stunned. Few Taoists are proficient in all disciplines. Most often, each disciple mastered only one discipline before rushing off to make money. This master, however, was primarily proficient in only fade and physiognomy. However, these 8 coffins encompassed far more than just these 2 branches of understanding. It was clear that a grand formation had been laid here by a Taoist master from the past. A cold sweat broke out on the master's forehead. With such a scene, even if his master had come personally, he wouldn't have been completely certain of understanding. Boss Gao, seeing the gravity of the situation, was also a bit panicked. But unlike the master, Boss Gao was a businessman, always prioritizing profit. After a moment's composure, Boss Gao came to his senses. Things had come to this point. Even if the coffins contained the king of hell, there was no way it would stop the old man from making money. Boss Gao acted decisively. First, he contacted the relevant authorities to remove the coffins. Rumors circulating that Boss Gao had attempted to smuggle the coffins were absurd, given the circumstances and the outcry. How could he have kept them for himself? Next, he contacted a highly accomplished monk from the local Liwan temple. Boss Gao's initial intention was simply to have the monk visit as a showpiece, to appease the public. However, the monk remained unmoved by Boss Gao's generous incense money, and even told him that the 8 coffins were meant to suppress the big gate of Guangzhou. The reason was that, as early as the late Qing dynasty, a wealthy businessman had, despite dissuasion, broken ground and built a house in this very area. As a result, the wealthy merchant was taken away before the house was completed. But the merchant's life alone was far from enough to fill the gate. Seeing the increasing number of casualties in the city, the then current Chamber of Commerce pooled their resources to invite a Taoist master to the site. He set up an 8-coffin formation to seal the gate. Thanks to the master's immense magical power, even if the coffins contained only talismans, and no one, Guangzhou would still be safe for 100 years. Who could have imagined such a coincidence? That Boss Gao would choose this spot and, by sheer coincidence, unearth all 8 coffins? Now that the 8-coffin formation has been broken, there will be no peace. With that, the monk returned with his apprentice. Not only Boss Gao, But even the master was terrified after hearing this. He wanted to urge Boss Gao to wait and see until he had a better plan. Unexpectedly, Boss Gao's eyes flared, and he yelled at the master, "This incident is due to your poor surveying, so you must be held responsible." The master knew Boss Gao was desperate and fearful. After all, the workers had already arrived, and a day's delay would cost a fortune. So, the master offered Boss Gao the worst possible solution: find a Nanyang master to fight poison with poison. You're all probably familiar with the specialties of these Nanyang masters. That's right, they raise little ghosts. The master recommended a fellow monk from the renowned Bincheng king to Boss Gao. These masters, with their short lives, will do anything for a fee. In a situation like Liwan, a place so dangerous that even accomplished monks would be helpless, the Nanyang master readily agreed upon the price. However, upon arriving and seeing the massive scale of the operation, he secretly groaned. But even for these people, there are rules of the trade. As the saying goes, take money, then eliminate disaster for others. Furthermore, if the master claimed to be incompetent at this point, he'd never again be able to succeed. The Ghost King's method was much as the master had predicted, using little puppies as bait, having them act as intermediaries at the main gates, thus blocking the flow of energy between the yin and yang worlds. While this method was indeed feasible, Guangzhou was a city with a population of over 10 million. Even if the king's little puppies were powerful, they couldn't withstand such a large number of people. Consequently, during the days the king stayed in Guangzhou performing the ritual, his complexion deteriorated visibly. Not only did the king have to perform this ritual for a full 7 days, but all 80 of his puppies were also dispatched. Of course, while the king's plan was doomed to fail, it was still effective. The construction team was able to dig the foundation, and the public opinion interference was gone. With only 1 day left to complete the task, Boss Gao, overjoyed, pretended not to notice the Ghost King's face, and happily went out to socialize and drink with his superiors. Boss Gao had originally planned to ask the master to accompany him, but on the 4th day of the Great King's ritual, the master excused himself and returned to Hong Kong. In reality, the master had foreseen the calamity to come and fled. As a result, Boss Gao, drunk as a slush that evening, returned to his residence, only to be discovered by his foreman the next day. Dead from a cerebral hemorrhage. The Great King, who was staying at the hotel, was later discovered sitting on an altar piled with small coffins, his eyes bulging, and blood vomiting all over the floor. He had died suddenly. According to workers who witnessed the scene, the Great King stared at the construction site with his eyes wide open, his face filled with fear, as if he had witnessed the most horrific scene before his death. Not only the 2 individuals involved, but also Boss Gao's wife died the next day from grief. Even Boss Gao's mistress and illegitimate child, who were kept abroad, died mysteriously soon after. That makes a total of 8. The untimely deaths of 4 developers were unbearable for Han and his family. Hoping not to die suddenly or become the target of a demonic spirit, they moved away and never returned to the Liwan Plaza area. The stories of these 4 developers are based on rumors and online rumors, and have never been officially reported, raising doubts about their authenticity. Judge for yourself whether they are true or false. The development of this land was delayed until a wealthy Taiwanese businessman arrived, a believer in metaphysics, and having learned of the tragic deaths of his 4 predecessors, he sought guidance from a master of metaphysics. After receiving the master's guidance, the businessman began implementing a series of plans, and everything went smoothly without major problems. Strangely, for unknown reasons, the businessman later transferred the Liwan project, already well established, to a local and abruptly departed. No one knows what happened to him, just as no one knows how the master of metaphysics managed to temporarily stave off the evil spirit. Why do such dangerous places exist in our lives? Every place has a mysterious gate. This gate only opens when someone needs to pass through. Or on special days, the gates are opened for a single day. For example, we often hear the elders say, "The gates open on the 15th day of the 7th month." This refers to this. Once the gates are broken, disorder in both worlds will result. At the very least, it could be haunted, and at worst, it could even claim lives. Thus, a rumor circulates around the square. The reason so many people die each year is because the 8 coffins and 8 corpses have been moved, breaking the spell that suppressed evil spirits, causing the gates of hell to open wide, allowing countless wronged souls and evil spirits to rush out. Whether these claims are true or false is a matter of opinion, but the continuous deaths make it impossible to deceive ourselves with coincidences. The stories of supernatural events surrounding Guangzhou's Liwan Square continue to circulate, and so do suicides and sudden deaths.